everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. We are nearing completion of our reading of Gravity's Rainbow. This is the second to last video in this series. Once I'm done with the series, I'll probably film a review, a more general video talking about the book. And I believe that with part 4, which we began with this section, with the counterforce, the novel completely falls to pieces in the most crazy way possible. The final couple hundred pages of Gravity's Rainbow are famously challenging and famously cryptic, and at times it's very tough to understand what happens to characters, Slowthrop most notably. I'll probably discuss Slowthrop's fate more explicitly in the final video in the series, but at the same time, during this reread, I was probably convinced that, you know, throughout the first half of the book, maybe getting acquainted with Pynchon's style, with the novel's specific type of craziness, maybe that will counterbalance the extreme craziness of the final pages. That maybe the novel will teach me to read it well enough so that I would have something to navigate the final pages with, the final section with. No, that didn't truly happen. Let's just say that I think it's up there with the toughest pieces of fiction I've ever read. But at the same time, in part 4, we do get some narrative conclusion. We do get some resolution when it comes to a few of the subplots in the book, even some that weren't there at all in part 3 and that we've not read about in the last 400 pages. But also we get the story of Byron the Lightbulb, one of the most unforgettable passages from Gravity's Rainbow, from the entire novel. One of those stories that, you know, you always remember from Pynchon, even in his most confusing books, like the story of that guy converting the rats in the sewers of New York from V. Byron the Lightbulb connects deeply with all of the economic and historical reflections in Gravity's Rainbow, on how what we could call the capitalist system keeps people in check, and perverts maybe the rules of economy and the rules of business in order to stay in power. But at the same time, I personally read Byron the Lightbulb also as a synonym, an image for the author himself, for Pynchon. The story of Byron the Lightbulb, coming as it does toward the end of the book, in many ways anticipates some of the main themes in Vineland, the novel that follows Gravity's Rainbow, even though it came out some 17, 18 years later. I can never remember whether Vineland was published in 89, 90, 91, 92. I don't know why. I usually remember the dates of the other Pynchon novels. The one central concern in Vineland is the failure of the cultural revolution of the 1960s, cultural and social and political revolution in the US of the 60s, and the way that hopeful wave was corrupted once more by the dynamics of power. And it seems to me that Vineland, to me, feels like a very embittered novel, and very depressing too, even though some people find it actually quite fun. And it seems to me that the story of Byron the Lightbulb, ending as it does with Byron looking at his failed revolution, the light bulb revolution, and being embittered by it, filled by the knowledge that this revolution failed and that he alone knows the truth about how the world goes, how it's structured, and he is doomed to see it fall to pieces all the same. That to me has some clear parallels with the way the narration and some of the characters behave in that novel, and with the stance of the narrator in literature in general. Throughout Gravity's Rainbow, Pynchon gives you all these snippets on how the world is structured, how war is a continuation of business, all these very audible opinions on how the world goes and how life is or should be lived. But at the same time, it's not like these suggestions are ever going to change anything about how the world is structured, if you get my meaning. Literature, for its very nature, is more consolatory than programmatic or even propagandistic, or at least it should be. What I'm trying to say is that the Pynchon, or in general the author of most novels of these sorts, just like Byron the Lightbulb, can see clearly how the world is structured, but because of its ambiguity, because of all its complexities, he is unable to change it, also because of his position. He is not in a position of power, he is a writer. I do believe that that type of bitterness emerges very clearly at times in Gravity's Rainbow. It emerges even more clearly in Vineland, later Pynchon novels that deal with the same theme, most notably Inherent Vice 2 deals with the way the downfall of the 1960s peace and love culture in California, deals with that theme in more mellow tones and without the bitterness you find in Vineland, but you do feel all of these tensions and they emerge very clearly in the story of Byron the Lightbulb in GR. For what it's worth, I should probably also mention that Harold Bloom, a controversial, very famous scholar with very strong opinion, believes that the story of Byron the Lightbulb is among the very, very best pieces of fiction of the American 20th century, and possibly its ending is the saddest thing Pynchon ever wrote, or at least so it says in the introduction to a collection of essays curated about Pynchon. Sorry about the noise, there's a helicopter landing in my garden. Now, when I was mentioning how some subplots are beautifully concluded. Well, beautifully is not the right word, it's not the word I'm looking for, but they are at least given a conclusion in part 4, and of course I'm talking most notably about the story of Roger and Jessica. I remember from my early videos in this series that many of you felt like the story of Roger and Jessica was sort of giving Gravity's Rainbow a sense. Even through the most cryptic and absurd and even disturbing passages, you still had that very straightforward love story set in the last years of the war between these people who supposedly shouldn't be together, but against all odds they are because they're in love and fuck the war. And that was very consolatory. It was beautiful, and I myself loved that story, and to be completely honest, I didn't at all remember how it ended up. I remembered it didn't have a happy ending, but I didn't fully remember how that unhappy ending came about. And in the story of Roger and Jessica, I have to admit, I believed I find the one very ugly thing about Gravity's Rainbow. Now, I'll try to be clear. Gravity's Rainbow is a confusing book, it's difficult. In many ways, my rereading mirrors a lot my first experience with the book, and at times throughout the last few weeks, I came to really hate this book in the way you come to hate certain books you just feel like throwing at the wall. Not because it's bad, not because I regret rereading it, it's just that kind of book to me. But at the same time, I sort of understand some of the complexities of the book. You get the occasional lyrical passage that it's very confusing, but you can perceive the beauty of the language. There's one very early in the next and final session about the tragic dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. But when it comes to Roger and Jessica, I can find no excuse. Why? And by all means, let me know if your experience with this narrative twist was different. Because it seems to me that in part 1 and in those few passages in part 2 where we read about Roger and Jessica, both of them were full-fledged characters. You got to see both sides of the relationship and you got to experience them fully. In part 4, it seems to me like you only see Roger's side of the relationship, and Jessica ends up looking either rather stupid or fully fucking evil. It's almost like she never truly loved Roger, she was only with him because of the war, because maybe the war made her scared, or maybe she made her braver or more adventurous than she naturally was, and now that the war is over, she's going to go back to Jeremy, or however Beaver is called, and they're going to be happy because she doesn't really care about Roger that much. And that, my friends, is a very common narrative trope, it's a very standard structure, and it's a deeply toxic one, because it comes from a very masculine perspective, whereas it almost seems like only Roger's love was true, whereas Jessica's love was never really there, and she is this sort of femme fatale who is evil and is not even entirely human. This is kind of the same perspective, if I have to be honest, you find in lots of emo music from the 90s and early noughts. All these songs sung by whiny guys whose girlfriends left them, and they're all about, oh, I loved you so much, but there's a very strong underlying message of even violence. There's this idea of dehumanizing the woman and making it all about the guy's suffering. What happens in Gravity's Rainbow, and once again, let me know if you perceive this differently, is that either Jessica changed her mind for no reason, which makes this a not that well planned or well narrated narrative twist, and makes her not that good a character after all, good as in well developed and well presented, or that we only get to see Roger's side. Ursula Le Guin, a sci-fi author, famously said that the dynamics of the patriarchy are inscribed within our stories, and that for that reason we need new stories. And once again, this is a very common narrative device, narrative technique, the idea of the guy, the man who is so in love with a woman and he is left by her because she is cruel. It's the Sorrows of Young Werther all over again, except that the Sorrows of Young Werther was written by Goethe as a way of getting rid of some very toxic thoughts, and the book does not commend Werther's behavior at all. Even though later it was perceived differently by people, because people tend to read books in the wrong way. What can you do? And sometimes that's beautiful, but sometimes Gatsby somehow becomes a good guy, even though that's debatable. Without losing sight of the point, I'll just mention a rather fun, rather cute romantic comedy called 500 Days of Summer, which I'm sure most of us will have watched, and that's a fun movie, and it's very good at showing you the how subtle and how difficult to spot the perversity, the perversion of that narrative trope, the idea of the guy in love who is cruelly left by the woman, is, because that movie, I'm not going to spoil you that much, but throughout the movie it seems like Summer is being cruel, but gradually you come to see maybe things that you didn't notice at first. The fact that, sure, the relationship was good, but the protagonist was also being kind of douchey, that he was being condescending, that there were reasons why the relationship didn't work. It's not just that she changed her mind at a certain point and stopped loving him. In Gravity's Rainbow, I do not feel at all like the relationship is handled that well. It seems to me that Jessica is sort of demonized and dehumanized even in part 4. And by the way, this narrative device, this plot twist, you know, a lovable good guy character is deeply in love with a woman and she leaves him for somebody who is part of the establishment and usually fully fucking evil, is an incredibly common device in Pynchon's novels. It's there in Vineland, it's there in Inherent Vice, it's there in Against the Day, it's there in Bleeding Edge. I would argue it's probably there too in Mason and Dixon, in the way the Mason and Rebecca relationship is structured, which, number one, begs the question, whatever happened to Thomas Pynchon? And number two, I would say in all of those novels, all of them, it's handled much better. I don't want to name characters because I don't want to spoil anybody those specific novels. Tell you what, I'll talk about Vineland because the relationship there, you get to notice it from the start and not spoiling you any plot twist. Even there, you get this same relationship trope with Zoid and Frenzy Gates. And even though Frenzy Gates is at times a fully fucking evil character, I never thought throughout, and there too, Zoid is clearly still very much in love with her, I never felt throughout Vineland as if Frenzy was dehumanized. You get to see her motives, you get to see the reasons why the relationship went the way it did. She is always a great and full character. Jessica, in part 4 of Gravity's Rainbow, stops being a fully fledged character. She becomes a shadow of her former self. But again, let me know what you think about this, and let me know what you think about the rest of the developments this far into part 4. Let me know how are you taking Slothrop's deconstruction and fragmentation, whether you read it literally, you read it somehow metaphorically, or a bizarre mixture of both. And I'll see you 2 weeks from now, or something like that, for the final video in the series. Let me know what you think in the comments, and once again, thank you for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.